Since 1967, the one great defining feature of outer space has been that it belongs to no one. No nation, no party, no clique. So, what does it mean when President Trump says he wants to build a space force?
Very importantly, I'm hereby directing the Department of Defense and Pentagon to immediately begin the process necessary to establish a Space Force as the sixth branch of the armed forces. That's a big statement.
First, let's get this out of the way. A prospective Space Force will probably not involve a Death Star, a fleet of starfighters, or planet-destroying lasers. Sorry. And it's still not definite that it's even happening. Earlier this month, at Trump's direction, the Pentagon laid out a 15-page report outlining the steps it would take to begin to establish a Space Force. But those steps seem to be mostly bureaucratic. And to actually establish a new military branch would require the okay from Congress, which up until this point has mostly ignored Trump's calls for a Space Force. But it's worth looking at why President Trump is so keen on having one, and what it might mean for the future of warfare.
FRANS.
That's Franz von der Dunk. He's a space lawyer.
Space DER.
The first thing you need to know about space is that it's like the high seas, and that means it's governed by international law.
The Outer Space Treaty is the main treaty applicable to outer space. The most important provision is that outer space belongs to no one, is a kind of a global commons, and all the other legal rules and obligations follow from there.
So any existing laws that govern armed conflict would automatically apply to space. And in that treaty Franz mentioned, a provision that the moon and planets be used exclusively for peaceful purposes, and a ban on nations putting weapons of mass destruction in outer space.
Ultimately, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. I mean, if he talks about a space force and he actually means stationing weapons of mass destruction in outer space, that is clearly prohibited. If he means we're going to establish a military basis on the moon, that is clearly prohibited. On the other hand, if it means, well, we're going to beef up the military presence of the United States in outer space, as long as it is non-aggressive, as long as it doesn't involve weapons of mass destruction, there's nothing wrong with that, legally speaking.
But the administration has already used aggressive language while announcing the Space Force.
Our adversaries have transformed space into a warfighting domain already, and the United States will not shrink from this challenge.
And the treaty itself leaves a lot of gray areas. First, it doesn't actually ban the use of conventional weapons in space. So things like intercontinental ballistic missiles that enter space on the way to its target. And there are no hard and fast rules for what would happen should any country violate the treaty. So what would conflict in space even look like? Well, there's already a ton of military equipment in space. Satellites that are used to aid military in guiding bombs and missiles, tracking enemy fighters, and gathering intel. Two of the biggest players are Russia and China, which are both years ahead of the US in developing the technology to destroy or disable satellites. Even more, there's been an explosion in the number of commercial satellites in space. These have a hand in everything from communication and transportation to power and computer systems. You can imagine a world in which hacking one of these satellites could hugely disrupt day-to-day life in the US. In the same way that cyber warfare changed the nature of warfare, space could do the same. So up until now, space has pretty much been peaceful. But is that changing? The Trump administration seems to think so.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.